I used to talk about that first business as kind of being like a real world punch in the face / MBA, where I got to learn what it really takes to build a business. And in the process, that one failed because I didn't know everything I needed to know getting into it. And so a lot of the themes that were present then are present now in this business, but they're from a more mature and informed place.
You're listening to the 7-Figure Leap podcast. We're here to leverage rich relationships and smart strategies to take your business to the next level. Here's your host, Dustin Rieckman.
All right, welcome back to the 7-Figure Leap. Another amazing guest today, and maybe the first guest that I've kind of officially met in the airport. So it predates that a little bit. I was in Boise, as you guys know, in June at Craft and Commerce, and I made my way into this really cool room for this mastermind experience that predated the conference itself. And I was a little intimidated, if I'm being honest. There were some cool people in there that I knew, some people I didn't know. And I have to just kind of fall on my own sword and say, I actually didn't know Barrett, who I'm going to introduce you to today. And then I immediately realized that I'm the only one in the room that didn't know Barrett, and that Barrett's like, everyone knows Barrett, and Barrett's like at the front of the room speaking. I'm like, okay, who is this guy? And then turned out he's like the most kind, approachable, humble guy, and he was very welcoming to me, and did not get to run into him very much during the conference. Then we're both headed home, me to St. Louis, him to Portland in the airport, and we stopped for a few minutes and exchanged text messages. We've had another conversation since, and I think, we found that we're really kindred spirits. And what's cool is that Barrett is definitely a few steps down the road in his entrepreneurial journey, and he's done some really amazing things for himself and other companies, which is really going to enlighten you all in this whole topic of like team building and scaling. So Barrett Brooks, welcome to the 7-Figure Leap podcast. And please take a moment to introduce yourself a little deeper than I just did.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's not an uncommon experience that I have, that I might walk into a room and a few people might know who I am, but many people are like, who the hell is this guy? And that's largely because I've spent a lot of my career kind of behind the scenes building companies. I haven't always been the front man, but I've been the person kind of working to build systems that allow for scale. And so if we kind of track my career journey, I started out as a management consultant, left that to start my first business back in 2011. It was called Living for Monday. My goal is to help young professionals find meaningful jobs out there in the world. That led me to intern for a little author that some people may have heard of named Seth Godin, and really learned from him, and kind of got permission from him almost to shut that business down after realizing that it wasn't working financially, and kind of went behind the scenes from there. Worked at a company called Fizzle, which I like to describe as kind of like the lynda.com for the creator economy before there was such thing as the creator economy, quote unquote.
Right.
And I led growth there, kind of behind the scenes, building the systems to drive new revenue. And then made the leap from Fizzle to ConvertKit, which is an email marketing, or started as an email marketing platform. Now it's really more of a full stack marketing platform for creators. Led growth there, and then went on to be COO, where I had responsibility basically for the whole company other than product and design, which reported into my best friend, or one of my best friends, Nathan Barry, the founder. And I was there for 5 years while we scaled from 3 million to 30 million in revenue, and from about 20 people to 75. And I'd say that's kind of the core. That's been the core of my career to this point. That's where I learned a lot of what I know, or rather where I got to practice a lot of what I thought I knew and see what worked and what didn't. And now I'm an executive coach to creators doing $1 million plus in their business. And at this point of deciding whether to stabilize and systematize their business or scale and grow from where they are. And I also have a podcast called Good Work, where I interview founders, artists, authors, adventurers about how they found their lever to change the world with. And it's been really fun. So that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. Yeah. You can tell you're a polished pro behind the mic. You went through that in a very succinct but following, or easy to follow way. And yeah, so Good Work. I'll just kind of start off with that. So you now kind of have the freedom, the space, I would say, to be creative for your own right. But I think something that seems to me to be both a passion project and something that you put an inordinate amount of effort and time into is this new podcast. It's not new anymore, but this podcast you launched this year called Good Work. I have to admit again, I was not aware of it. I'm in the room, and I think maybe John Meese, who is a friend between us, mentioned something about the podcast, and you had this like simulcast with Nathan Barry. And so to give people context, we're talking a little inside baseball. So ConvertKit hosted the conference I was at called Crafting Commerce. ConvertKit CEO is Nathan Barry, and Barrett, who just introduced himself, was the COO for 5 years. As they scaled from 3 to 30 million. So obviously instrumental in their massive growth, good friends with Nathan. They parted on great terms. And so they did the simulcast. So on the flight back, after I talked to Barrett in the airport, I listened to that episode and I was like, this is really cool. So I've become a huge fan of good work. And I just want to kind of give you the props for going deep with people, doing a lot of research, asking people that get interviewed a lot. Like, you have a kind of an A-list roster of guests. And some of these people, I've heard interviewed many times. And so really cool to kind of hear the story behind the story, questions that maybe challenge them in new ways. And I know that's not easy to do as someone who gets behind the mic myself. So first of all, great job. I think it's an amazing show. Hope everyone that's listening to this, if you like this and you want like deeper, business leaders, but kind of in a different light, and people that are just honestly doing good work in the world, and people who have kind of reached their potential, but they're using that in a really altruistic way to make a great difference in the world. Go pause this, go subscribe to Good Work, and then come back and let's hear about the man behind it. So anyway, Barrett, kudos to you for the podcast and all that you've achieved in your own business and for these other businesses. So the way I've heard the story, and maybe I'm oversimplifying, it's like you had your initial business and then you, to use your words, went behind the scenes and you basically became the scaling secret to some of these businesses, including ConvertKit. And I would term that sort of an entrepreneur. I know you had ownership stakes in some of these businesses and had, obviously a very prominent leadership role, but it wasn't your business, right? You weren't the owner, right, the CEO. Now you're back into a seat where you are, but you're sort of starting back in some sense to square one, right? Is it true that you're now a solopreneur again?
Yeah. In many ways, I feel like I've kind of returned back to where I began my entrepreneurial journey. It's like I'm picking up a little bit where I left off, but with a decade plus of legitimate experience about how business really works. I used to talk about that first business as kind of being like a real world punch in the face / MBA, where I got to learn what it really takes to build a business. And in the process, that one failed because I didn't know everything I needed to know getting into it. And so a lot of the themes that were present then are present now in this business, but they're from a more mature and informed place. And so like back then, the company was called Living for Monday, and it was about this combination of things that I felt like added up to meaning at work. And I would say I talk about a lot of the same things now, but having been through the struggle of trying to figure out how that works in practice. Not only how do I find meaning, but how do I help create it for others? Like, how do I create a container that is the company where people can come to work and realize their potential and experience meaning and live better lives because of it? And so that's kind of the basis for what I do now, both the podcast and in my coaching work, is how do I help other people put those principles to work and help reveal the ways in which they already have so that other people can learn from it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And a lot of times I'll spend, considerable time on this podcast sort of digging back through someone's history. And, one of my, abilities is extracting like, man, I'm hearing this as like your values or your purpose. Or like, do you feel like this is your calling or your mission? And, whatever the word that someone resonates with. I don't feel like I need to do that with Barrett because this is like his jam too. So I'll just let you express it. And when you look back at your own career, I know you went through a period of introspection after leaving ConvertKit, had suffered from some burnout, which is something I actually want to talk about a little bit, and my own experiences with that too, because I think it's part of the scaling story for so many of us. But in now in this current position, having the space to do creative work, have the podcast, and do the things you're doing, like, why do you do it? I know you're a family man, you've got a great wife and kids. And so when you think, why am I doing this at this time? And what do I want to be doing in the future? Like, what's really driving that? Do you feel there's a mission behind it?
Yeah. I mean, my core mission as I see it is a little bit meta in the sense that I think I'm uniquely skilled at helping people see potential that they might not see in themselves, unlock that potential, and then point it at something that matters, not just to them, but more broadly to the community that they serve. And it could be literally their neighborhood. It could be their city, their country, the world, or it could be an online community. And I'm not highly prescriptive in like what I consider to be good enough. What matters more to me is that people convince themselves and then pursue authentically something that is bigger than them, to be of service to people around them. And that's kind of this response to what I see in the world as like, if there's an enemy for my work, like every mission is in response to some kind of enemy. The enemy is apathy. The enemy is disengagement. The enemy is giving up. The enemy is saying, well, I can't do anything anyways, and so I'll just show up, get my paycheck, and go home and watch Netflix. And I just think we're meant for more than that. I think basically every person has the potential to achieve excellence in some area. And I view it as the goal of everything that I do, whether it's running a company, making my podcast, coaching entrepreneurs, to highlight that for people and really just pour into them in a way that says, look, I want you to know that you are loved and you matter just as you are. Like, I'm not saying you should be something more because you're not worthy. I'm saying because you are worthy and because you are capable, I want to see what that can turn into. And so that's kind of what I view as my organizing force.
I love that. And do you see that specifically applying, maybe at least in your professional life, to entrepreneurship? Because everything you said there could be true of a doctor, the garbage man, someone who's volunteering at church. Like, there's a lot of applications, right, of what you describe. But at least in your professional life, is entrepreneurship a common thread that you see continuing on?
I would say that it's I might describe it actually as like high agency people. Many times high agency people are entrepreneurs. But for example, an unreleased episode of the show that'll be out in a few weeks is with Tamara Winter. And Tamara is, Tammy leads or is the commissioning editor for Stripe Press, which is the publishing imprint of Stripe, this bigger company. And so Tamara for sure is an employee, right? She gets a salary from Stripe,
right?
But the way she leads, the way she shows up is in a very high agency kind of way. And she behaves like an entrepreneur, even though she's an employee. And that's true across a few different ways of how I look at this. Another example of this is Hannah Ritchie. She was the guest on the second episode of the show. And she is one of the editors at Our World in Data. And Our World in Data's mission is to help lay people, I'll call us, people who aren't data scientists, to look at what is true about the world in a new way. And fundamentally, I think that their mission is really about creating hope. It's helping people see that the world is actually getting better, even if the narrative is that it's getting worse. And so it's both. It does often get expressed as entrepreneurship, but there are other ways that this plays out as well.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, again, not to dwell on it, but I think it's something that people have either experienced, either professionally, that like in their career that drove them to entrepreneurship, or they've been deep enough into entrepreneurship and this or a previous business that this whole idea of burnout, is I think something that we don't talk enough about.
Yeah.
And I think you've been very open that you've experienced it. You took quite a hiatus from work in response to it. So I would assume you've thought a lot about it, talked to a lot of people about it, got coached on it. And I want to let you share your own experience. I want to share my mini version of it that I feel like I experienced earlier this year, and the wake-up call it provided me and some of the realizations it's driven me to that actually helped get me in that room that we met in. So, Barrett, if you don't mind, again, share as much as you feel comfortable, but what would you describe in your own experience as burnout? What did it feel like? What did you do in response to it? Like, how have you helped other people that are dealing with the same issues?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'll say is that I think burnout is most often an emotional problem, not a too much work problem. It sometimes is too much work, but I'd say that's less common than it being an emotional problem. And so for me, it was an emotional problem. And I did not realize I was burnt out until, the inciting incident of this whole story and arc of my growth was my wife sat me down one day, or one evening actually, kind of forced me to put my phone down, which was constantly in my hand at the time. And I'm irritated, I'm trying to get something done. And she says, no, I need to talk to you. And she just walks through what she's seeing in me. She says, look, you get home every day. You're frustrated with me. You're not present with your son, with me, with our family, with our friends. You're working constantly, and you just seem like you're not yourself. And what I want you to know is it has gotten worse and worse and worse. And I need you to do one of three things. Either I need you to change your relationship to work. so that this can resolve itself and you can show up differently. I need you to quit your job, or we can get divorced. Those are basically the three options. And it was in that moment when I realized, oh, wow, there really is a problem here. This has become serious enough that she felt the need to not give me an ultimatum. It was actually to say, these are your options. And I'm finally putting my foot down that this isn't working anymore. And what I knew in that moment was changing my relationship to my work was not going to be possible. I just don't have that dial or switch in me.
Yeah.
And so it was quit or get divorced. And I knew, obviously, of those two options, what mattered more to me. And so that began the long process of examining what was going on there and how did I end up in this spot where I, as a very self-aware individual, didn't even realize how bad it had gotten. And there were many factors. This was about a year into the pandemic. So obviously that's a huge factor in how people ended up there during that period of time.
Yeah.
But I think there was more at play there. And so if I get into the emotional piece of it, what I realized now looking back that maybe I couldn't see as clearly was that Nathan and I just fundamentally had different visions for where we wanted to take the company and what we thought we needed to do to continue to grow. And acknowledging that would have required us to admit that we weren't going to be able to work together anymore. And so there was this kind of like invisible barrier to admitting to myself what was going on, which is, oh, I won't get to have this job that I value so much. I won't get to have this identity that I care about. I won't get to work with my best friend. What will happen to that relationship if I admit this? And it was once I owned that it wasn't working for me, that like the way we were organizing our work, the way that my role was playing out, the goals that we had set at the company, that they weren't working for me. Not that they were wrong, but that they weren't working for me. That was the beginning of me being able to reclaim my sense of agency, actually. And what I had done was I think I had given up my sense of like where I think we should go. And the crux of that was I view it basically to the degree that I have been successful at all in my career, it's by trusting in other people. It's by coming back to this mission that I believe that people have more potential than they realize. And if you can unlock it, you can do incredible things. And so it actually wasn't me that built ConvertKit or the systems behind it or anything else. It was me that helped go find the people that could do it.
Yeah.
That's my magic thing, right? Is I have the ability to find the people and see what they have inside of them and say, here, go. And Nathan has a different skill set. He's a product person. He's a growth person. He's a like strategist. And we're both visionaries, I think, but in different ways. And so where he might rely on something like software or automation, I say, let's go get people to solve this for us. And those things were just in conflict in the way that we wanted to run the company. So if I were operating from my defaults, I would scale the team. I would build team. I would give them autonomy. I would have a high trust environment. And honestly, I would probably fire people when they couldn't perform and then bring new people in who can do the job. And I think Nathan had different defaults. And so once we were able to identify that, a lot of things unlocked in terms of why it felt so hard for us to figure out where to go. So that's kind of like how I got to the place of burnout. And I'll kind of leave it there for a minute and we can come back to whatever parts of it are interesting.
I'd love to, because I love the precipitating event. I love it takes, in many cases, an external person, oftentimes our spouse, right, to like reflect back that something's not right here.
Right.
So I interviewed Ryan Deiss on this podcast a few, maybe a month ago. And we also talked about scaling, but in a very different way. We were talking more about like operating systems and playbooks and, sort of that side, whereas I really value Barrett's introspection here on these sort of interpersonal things that happen, as well as the team building, which we're really going to focus on towards the end of the episode. But something Ryan shared, which is quite similar to what you just said, is came home late one night, 12-hour days at the office, and his wife was still up, and he's like, "Uh-oh, it's 1 a.m. My wife's got the bedroom light on. What's going on?" And he said she was very calm, and there wasn't any ultimatum. It was kind of like what you just said, Barrett. And she said, "Ryan, like, I know who you are. I know who I married. You're an entrepreneur. You're crazy. Like, I get it. I'm not asking you to change. You can keep doing exactly what you're doing. What I require, though, is if you're going to continue to do that, quit saying it's for your family." I was like, "Oh man, like, quit using us as the reason you're doing it, because it's not. Like, we've got plenty of money. We don't need you to do this." And that was his gut check and his ego check, and where he is kind of slapped him in the face that he was burning the candle on both ends. And then for me, I think in a less extreme version, January of this year, and I also love that you said it's an emotional problem, because from externally, my business was taken off, solopreneur. I'd spoken at StoryBrand. And in this moment that this week that happened in January, I just left Las Vegas. I spoke at Traffic and Conversion Summit. I was 2 weeks later going to be in Orlando speaking at PodFest. I was home for a week in between. And of course, solopreneur, I launched a new cohort of my group coaching program and all this stuff. And it was like the week I was home, I was not home. It was like I was working 14, 16-hour days. I was working all night because I was trying to catch up, and I'm trying to still prepare for my talk. And I was hosting my first in-person mastermind dinner in Orlando. So I had all this stuff, all this pressure that I'd put on myself, of course. And my wife, kind of a saint, didn't say much. And I was definitely starting to feel the tinges of burnout and this emotional dissonance. And as I left to go to Orlando, it was kind of the same moment, like, honey, have a great trip, be safe. We'll miss you. And also, we can't have any more weeks like this. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. You don't have to explain what I get it. And, I've made a lot of changes since then, started hiring team members. It was really kind of a culminating moment for me. Again, not really confrontational. It wasn't emotionally charged. It was very like, I love you. I get who you are, but this isn't working anymore. And so I think between me, you, and Ryan, we've got different kind of stages of that. So I love that we were able to unpack how this came about, how you realized it. And so, yeah, from there, Barrett, if you don't mind sharing, what'd you do about it? What followed? Did you get sick? What did burnout do to you once you realized that you had reached it?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there. I think one of the things that I didn't mention that I felt permission to engage with after my wife confronted me about this was I felt like I owed it to my family to continue earning the money I was earning.
Yep.
That there was this invisible force, which was, what will we do if I don't keep this job? And of course, there's many answers to that from a state of logical understanding, which is well, you can get another job, you can start a business. There's many ways to go about it. But really what unlocked it for me was we had always had the ambition to create secondary stock sales as an option for teammates to cash in on the value of their stock over time. And we had gotten an offer from an entrepreneur to buy about $1 million of secondary stock from people on the team. And at first we're like, oh no, we don't want to handle that right now. We know that's in the future, but now is not the time. And as I realized I was ready to leave, and Nathan and I identified this divergence of vision, he really wanted to settle into the team size we had. And I was like, oh, we got to hit the gas and hire. There was this moment where I said, if you want to hit pause on team growth, I think it's time for me to leave. And so I just want you to sit with that for a couple weeks and decide, hey, is this really what matters to you? Because if it does, then we really have reached the point of divergence. And before we go down the hill and devolve our relationship from all of this, I'd rather be very proactive and thoughtful and just make a plan for me to exit. And that was the first time that I said out loud and felt the freedom to say out loud, okay, this isn't working for me. And because I have permission now, and I know that we'll be okay, or we'll figure it out together on the money end, now I can start paving a path forward. Well, fast forward, that was the inciting incident to then decide to start doing the secondary sales. So that fall, right before I left, we offered the first secondary sale to investors, and teammates were allowed to sell stock that they had acquired through options. And so I sold a portion of my stock, and that gave us the financial freedom for me to then say okay, what is going on for me? And what do I need to do to recover from this? The way it was showing up in me and in my body and in my mind was tons of anxiety, lots of rumination. I think the combination of getting to that point at work and the pandemic just meant it was I had this reel of moments from my life that were negative moments just playing on repeat in my head. Just all the bad things that had ever happened to me. Weirdly, it was every athletic injury that had ever happened to me, every early relationship I was in that I had lost. And it was just this very odd experience of like, I've never been in that kind of place in my life. I've had anxiety in my life, but never this kind of like backwards looking, how did I get so screwed up kind of thing. And I'm not exactly sure why that was happening, but the meaning I make of that from where I am now is I think I was trying to figure out, how did I end up here?
Yeah.
Like, what were all the series of events that could lead me to what felt like a place of like peak success in my career? I mean, we had built a $30 million annual revenue company, and I felt the worst I had ever felt about my work. That makes no logical sense. So that was one way it was playing out. In my body, it was this constant feeling of something's wrong with me. And almost this like hypochondria of trying to figure out, am I sick? Am I ill? Is there something wrong with me? And what was wrong with me was I was out of alignment with myself. And I was trying to find any reason for that other than I had made choices that got me there.
Yeah.
And so much of the recovery was like, I left the company and I was just exhausted. Like mentally, physically, emotionally, I had nothing to give. And I think looking back, I was probably in a state of depression for a period of time leading up to and then after my departure. And I just couldn't quite see it then. I was functional. It's like I got out of bed every day, but I did not want to get out of bed every day.
Yeah, that's a huge distinction. Yep.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so much of the kind of year and a half after that was trying to really find my way back to myself. It was like asking myself the question, sometimes ad nauseum in an unhelpful way, like, who really am I? And who am I trying to become from here? And what do I need to do to get back to that? And it was just a hard, meandering path of like banging my head against the wall, basically trying to find the answers and find my way back to, where did this all begin and how can I get back to being me?
That's awesome. I mean, not awesome, but
yeah.
Awesome the way you've articulated it. I think there's people can relate to different parts of that. And I think, again, I'm just going to throw in my 2 cents because I think this is a spectrum. And I think people hit different versions of it. And burnout's obviously kind of a generic term. These are all different points of exhaustion, mentally, emotionally, anxiety, depression. There's lots of different things in play. For me, there's kind of 2 real quick points. I'd say like a couple years back when I was leaving engineering, I was basically working 2 full-time jobs, running a new business and engineering, and I put all this pressure on myself to launch this program, and I stupidly tried to launch it in like July when no one wanted it, and I was trying to go on vacation. It's like this combination of all this stress, completely self-imposed. I literally, my chin went numb. Like and do not Google numb chin because it's pretty much a telltale sign you have a brain tumor on your brainstem. Turns out, luckily, I did not have that, but I was on vacation with a numb chin, like freaking out, waiting to get back to a doctor, and turned out it was basically stress. It was like I clenched my jaw, pinched nerves in my neck or whatever. So there was like a physical manifestation, which was important because it made me change a lot of stuff about how I was approaching my business. It actually made me cut off the engineering job. It was actually like the final straw that was like, look, I'm going one way or the other. I can't do both. Like, We'll see what happens. And then much more recently in that whole January episode, through a series of events, including what I talked about with my wife and meeting some new people and seeing new opportunities, I had been running all these cohorts myself. And so I'm with everything in the business, sales, marketing, fulfillment, customer service, the Dustin show. I thought, solopreneur, wearing this badge of honor, like this is awesome. And I distinctly remember being in a hotel room in Orlando, the highest of highs in my business. I just had this mastermind meeting. All these people that I love were there. I'd spoken on stage, getting all these clients, and I had to show up for a Zoom meeting to lead my flagship program. And it was the very first time in like 2 years of doing that. And I'm like, I don't want to be on this meeting. Like, this feels boring. Like, this feels redundant. Like, why am I doing this? And that was the trigger. I'm like, okay, it's no more like I have to scale. I either have to burn this thing down or scale it. I can't stay here because I'm starting to feel this like tinge of burnout and this emotional distress. I'm starting to resent the thing I built. And so in that phase, this is not that long ago, I was like, you know what? Like, I want to build a $10 million company. I want to be a CEO. I need to build a team. And I unlocked all these new creative challenges that I've wrestled with ever since. And that Barrett's going to help us through anyone who's kind of in that phase here as we talk about team building. But anyway, for me, that was like the second manifestation. I feel like I nipped it a little earlier and I made a positive reaction to it where it's like, I just want a new challenge. It's not like I wasn't physically tired, like to your point, financially perfect. It was just like this emotional, like almost like I was bored to burnout. Like I lost the creative juice that really made me excited about my business. So anyway, I kind of throw in that commentary of my experience. So
I think it's super common. And so just one comment on that, and then we'll keep rolling. Please. Is I think the positive loop here, or the way it can result in a positive feedback loop, is you start to be able to catch it earlier and earlier, to your point. And so anytime I notice myself like having a physical symptom of stress or whatever, tends to show up as back pain or like muscle tightness for me, or I wake up and my jaw hurts.
Yeah.
What I used to do was, I'd go down the Google rabbit hole. Like, oh, what's wrong with me, right? Something's wrong with me. And now what I do instead is I've made a hard rule for myself. I never Google symptoms. If I need to do that, I outsource to my doctor always, because they are a professional with an objective viewpoint, right?
Yeah.
And there are limitations to that, but that's not what we're here for. So that's the first rule I set for myself. And then I go back to, when did this begin? When did I start experiencing this stuff? And usually there was a setting off point. It's like I agreed to do something I don't actually want to do, or I overbooked myself for a given week, or whatever it might be. And it's like, okay. So I'm actually having an emotional reaction to that that's manifesting itself because I haven't processed that yet. And so these are the kinds of positive feedback loops that can come from this stuff. But nothing like that happens if you're not intentional, right? And if you don't actually say, okay, so what are my patterns when I get into these times of stress or emotional misalignment or whatever it is? And if you don't do that work, then you actually just end up in this cycle where you're repeating the same thing over and over, and it never really ends.
Yeah, that's super useful. I didn't mean to spend almost the entire interview talking about burnout, but I think, as I said, there's a spectrum of it. I think anyone who's growing a business, which is our entire listening audience, anyone who's especially would identify as like they're scaling something, it's kind of inevitable that you're going to start experiencing some of these things. And I think there's a ton of wisdom in what Barrett just shared. I hope in his story, my story, what Ryan had shared previously, people will at least be more aware of it and be willing to seek the help, seek the resources before it, hurts them, and then it hurts their progress in their business. So I want to get to kind of one of the antidotes to that, which is building a healthy team and scaling in a smart way, which I'm going to kind of give Barrett the microphone here in a few minutes to do that. Before we do that, though, I don't want to miss the opportunity to open up a little bit more about like what you're doing now. So we talked a lot about this journey from ConvertKit into this burnout and the things you addressed there. But I'm really excited about what you're doing now. I talked about your podcast. I know you're doing executive coaching. You're doing some writing. I know you gave an amazing workshop at Craft and Commerce, which we're going to get a mini version of today on the podcast. But just take a few minutes, share what you're doing right now, what you're excited about, maybe a little bit of your vision for what you're going to do with this new business that you find yourself in today.
Yeah. So I mentioned that I had this meandering path after I left ConvertKit, and I now look at it as like I did a series of career experiments, and I made a book about climate change, partnering with Seth Godin again. Went to work at a coffee company as COO here locally. I went to back to a startup. Actually, the shirt I'm wearing, if you're watching the video, is called Panthalassa, and was in an executive role there. And it was in that role where I started feeling all the same stuff again, but it came back a lot quicker, to your point, and I was able to catch it earlier. It was like, this is a completely different company, completely different role, all new people, and I'm feeling the exact same way I was. What's up with that?
Wow.
And what I realized out of that was I was actually still neglecting myself. I was like looking all over for someone I could go to work for that would be the kind of leader that I would learn from, that I could be inspired by, that I would follow. And what I was avoiding was admitting that it was actually time for me to come back to being an entrepreneur again, that I was the leader I was actually looking for. Mm-hmm. And I just wasn't ready to own the cost of that, which is now I'm responsible for all my income again.
Yeah.
And because I had failed before, there was like all these barriers I had to overcome. So in talking to my coach about that, I said, I need to prove to myself that I can make it as an entrepreneur first. which is ironic because at this point, I built companies way bigger than worrying about where's the next dollar going to come from.
Right. You're not really needing 30 million in annual recurring revenue for your family in Portland, but I guess
Yeah,
you take
exactly.
it. All right.
Right.
But no, I get it. So you kind of, this distant past version of Barrett did your first company, I fail, I think is a subjective word, but it didn't last. Then you were at
The
this great
financials failed,
success with other people's companies, but now you're back to I feel called to do this on my own, but my only experience in doing it on my own didn't end well. And so, I could see how that would create a lot of self-doubt.
Yeah. So there was this question of, okay, so what kind of business then? Do I want to start a startup again, go get funding? Do I want to build product-based business, or do I want something simpler? And where I landed was I had been coaching for 7 or 8 years on the side of all these other jobs. And I knew it was a skill set that people value, that I'm pretty good at, and that it was something I could train at to become world-class at. I've got this resistance to the job title of coach just because it can mean so many different things. And I think it often means a negative thing to many people who see it. And so that was the big emotional barrier I had to get over. And I just realized that if I train as if I'm a professional athlete, but for coaching, then no one will be able to debate the value that they're getting from me, as long as I treat it like a real profession. And so I just dedicated myself to that. And the reason I picked the model was it was the clearest way to get to the most definite, yes, I have succeeded at providing for my family financially as an entrepreneur, that you just add layers and layers of complexity to that, the further away from services you get and the bigger the team and funding and all of that. So I said, all right, fundamentally, I think I'm a creative person and I've ended up in operating roles that I'm good at, but I actually want to be the founder, the creator, that version of it. And coaching is the best business model I can think of that requires the least number of hours, the most excellence from me, and frees up the most time to do creative work. So I designed it so that Tuesdays and Thursdays are my coaching days. I can handle a max of 16 clients. They pay me $3,000 a month. And obviously you can do the math on that, on what the top potential earning is while using 2 days a week for coaching. I handle 4 clients a day. So if that can get me to about $50,000 in revenue, that's more than, that's a great model basically.
Yeah.
And I still have 3 days a week to write, make a podcast and all of that. So I viewed it as I want to be primarily a writer with coaching as my business model. And that's transformed a little bit to I'm right now primarily a podcaster with coaching as my business model. And writing kind of happens in the background pretty much for myself at the moment. So that was kind of the inspiration for it. But it all comes back to this mission that we talked about, which is I see coaching as a very effective tool for unlocking the potential in founders and allowing them to achieve their visions. And if I'm aligned in terms of the cause or the end result of the work that my clients are doing, it's actually a great lever for impact. We come back to this lever idea. There's that Archimedes quote of, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. I love that quote. And that idea of creating a lever for ourselves using our career. The career is the fulcrum, and the lever is where are we pointing it? And so for me, I see coaching as a way for me to impact many different areas of the world that I care about through the founders. And it's a really effective lever. And so I'm kind of viewing this period of my career right now as this 5-year chunk, almost of a fallow period where I'm pouring into other entrepreneurs. I'm interviewing people on my podcast that I admire that have their own levers for impact. And then all of that, I expect at some point might actually lead me to start a bigger company, something that's going to be bigger than me, more product oriented. But I'm approaching that with what I call an open-handed posture. I'm not pressing. I'm not trying to find it now. It might be true that I'm a forever coach, that this is my true calling and best lever I can find. But I'm also open to the fact that maybe this is an in-between period where I'm just pouring into myself and moving towards something new that I can't yet see. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a beautiful summary of, the present and being kind of detached from the future, but realizing that what you're doing now not only fuels the present and, supports your family life and the things you need it to do, but you're planting many seeds of opportunity that could sprout into lots of different relationships, businesses, partnerships, all the things with the podcast and obviously the work that you're doing directly with founders in coaching. One very tactical question. I do want to get into this kind of team building framework. Do you have a team now? Is it just you, or do you have an executive assistant or anyone else supporting you?
Yeah, so I have an executive assistant. She works about 10 hours a week. She's phenomenal. I know a lot of people use folks from around the world in that kind of role. I chose to actually hire someone that's been a career executive assistant in big professional services firms. And I pay her a pretty good hourly rate because I know that I can trust her with almost any scale of project. So she handles my calendar. She handles all my travel. She's been pitching speaking events for me on my behalf. And so it's this really beautiful kind of like partnership where she can handle many different scales of tasks and projects. And again, it's an example of me trusting her as a professional where if she has a limit, she'll tell me. Yeah. And my job is to give her the highest leverage things I can think of that she can help me with to build my business. She's the only person I work with that consistently. I've got a producer who runs the kind of post-production on the podcast that I outsource that to. And then actually a developing thing is that I made a pitch to my wife, who's currently on a sabbatical, had gone through her own experience of burnout. I said, I think I might actually be the creative person. And I don't know that I enjoy running the business side all that much. As you're looking for jobs, like I want to offer you a job as the CEO of this company. And maybe you could come run the company and I'll be the product basically for now. And so she's currently considering my job offer for that. All the other
I knew that's where this is going. Like, I'm still waiting on the response. No, that's awesome. I love that. And my wife and I have worked together a couple different times, and we've figured out that that's not for us. But I really respect couples who can do that, and that's great. And that actually segues really well. So, my current status, I talked about January. I was completely solo, a few contractors doing contracty things, very, very fractional. And so I literally 3 weeks ago hired my first executive assistant, also US based, just a real professional, pay her well. We're continuing to kind of find the things to take off my plate, but that's been very freeing. I've already got a couple more positions in mind for the second half of this year. And so finally, I've kind of teased this 10 times now. I know your workshop that you did in Boise was super well received. And obviously we don't have time to do a full workshop, but maybe at a high level framework, again, a lot of the people listening, maybe it's their first hire, maybe they're going from 2 to 3, or they want to go from 3 to 10 employees. Tell us Barrett's best advice for doing that well and not regretting it, because I think it's a huge fear for a lot of solopreneurs. Like, man, I got another mouth to feed. What am I going to? Then I got a meeting to attend. I got people to manage. A lot of us left the whole career because we hated managing all the people. And I'm throwing myself in that bucket. So yeah, man, I just want to turn the mic over to you and let you enlighten us a bit on that before we wrap up.
Yeah. And I'll just say that I think this is the area that is the greatest unmet need in the kind of creator world, where you get these mature businesses, but it's not a skill set many people have built.
Yep.
And if I make a course, it will probably be on this. So we're kind of testing this out as an area of focus. But here's how I think about hiring. It is a skill just like anything else. And if you're running the kind of business that I think a lot of your audience runs, they've figured out everything. To your point, they've done every aspect of their business. They've done content, they've done SEO, they've done sales, they've done product delivery. And the number one thing I want people to understand is that hiring and managing is just another one of those skills to add to your tool belt. It's not a fundamentally different thing. It is not something that some people know and others don't. It's a skill that some people choose to build. And if you approach it that way, I think it can become the biggest asset. It becomes your lever as the CEO. One of my mentors and people I look up to is named Jerry Colonna. He was actually episode 3 of Good Work, and he's an executive coach, founder of Reboot. He says the job of the CEO is 3 things. First is to set the vision. Second is to recruit and retain the people. And third is to allocate resources. And he added a 4th one recently that I strongly agree with, which is to create a culture of belonging, or to create belonging in the organization. And you'll notice that none of those things involve product delivery, product creation, sales, any of that stuff. And so I think in a mature organization that's ready for scale, the CEO moves further and further away from the day-to-day work and more towards leadership. And I think fundamentally, everyone has the capacity for it. So if we think about hiring, your business breaks down into a set of processes. Every business could be defined by these 10, 20, 50, 100 processes, whatever it is. And so the first task in building out a team is actually to understand the building blocks of your business and to break it down. Here's every process required to run my business at its current scale. And then for my vision, that might be a year out, 3 years out, 5 years out. Here's every process that would be required in that version of the business. As I can imagine it right now, obviously it will change over time.
Sure.
And as you define those processes, you start to see, oh, some of these things go together. Like they are like-minded skills that would be required in order to do these things. And magically, you start to define something that looks like a role. And there's two things to understand about roles. First of all, the two types of roles are either revenue generating or roles that support revenue. And I'm of the opinion that when you're beginning to build a team, ideally you're hiring for revenue generating roles. The biggest pitfall I see people make is they end up with a team full of people who are supporting revenue, which creates more and more pressure on the founder to generate more revenue because there's no one else doing it. So that's the failure mode here, is when you hire a bunch of people who cost you money and don't generate any. So what you need to understand is either you need to make revenue generating hires, or you are the revenue generator that supports the hires you're making that are supporting roles. So you can label each, you can imagine like a square of processes that make up, here is a role that a person could reasonably do. Label each one. It's either a dollar sign or it's a hand. A dollar sign means it generates revenue. A hand means it supports revenue. And understanding the difference is important. A job description often looks like a laundry list. That's a horrible way to define a job. If you look at the average role posted online, it's probably poorly defined. No single person could handle the workload, and no one has the experience that they say is required to do it.
Yep.
So to avoid that, I do three things in terms of roles. The first one is I decide what is the one metric that will evaluate this person's success if they join the team. Only one. Could be new customers, could be customer satisfaction, could be new products created, pick a metric. And that metric should layer up to the business growing. Underneath that, there's probably 2 to 3 leading metrics that drive the number one metric. So what's the thing that happens before their key metric that you could measure to know ahead of time if they're likely headed in the right direction? So you have one key metric, 2 to 3 supporting metrics, and then you get just 3 to 5 responsibilities. These could be run this process, run that process, run that process. It might be create processes around this thing, but those processes or those key responsibilities should roll up to driving the key metric. And if everyone did that listens to this show is said, here's the role I'm hiring for, title, this, revenue generating or support, number one metric, 3 supporting metrics, 3 to 5 responsibilities, you would be more successful at identifying what you're looking for than almost anyone is when they're designing roles. So that's the design piece.
Okay,
I'll give you 2 more quick things here.
That's awesome. I mean, it's making me feel better about how I hired my executive assistant, and then some of the script. I'm probably a little verbose, but ultimately, yeah, it's like, in her case, it's like I track my time. It's like the amount of hours I get to add to my CEO hat and take out of my operator and admin hat is you winning, which means you get bonuses and stuff. So that is like the metric. So yeah, I love the simplicity of that. Very, very good.
So that's designing roles, right? And then there's the how do you find the people? Mm-hmm. And I think fundamentally what you have to understand when you're looking for people is probably you don't know them yet. You do not know the best person to fill the role. Every one of you listening to this thinks, no, I do know them. It's my sister. It's my friend. It's this, it's that. Please don't hire that person, or at least don't hire that person until you've evaluated other options.
Yeah.
It's very unlikely that you have met or already know the person that should come to work for you. It's possible, but it's unlikely. The most likely time that that's true is if you've managed teams in the past, where you've had people doing this kind of role working for you before. So if that's not true, you have to go find these people. And there are hundreds and thousands of communities online where these kinds of people exist. So your job is to go find where that is. If you need to hire a software developer, there's places to make those hires. If you need to hire an executive assistant, there's places to make those. Go find those places and post your role there. Ask people to apply. The other way is to look up people. LinkedIn, I know people love to crap on LinkedIn. It is the single best tool for actual scaling businesses that exist in the world.
Yeah.
If you want to hire, almost every professional that you might hire has a LinkedIn profile, and they have their whole resume right there waiting for you to look at it.
That's exactly how I found my EA.
So if you go and you search city, role history, you can search skills. There's any number of things. You can hone in on 50 candidates without ever even getting an application. And reaching out to those people, and we won't get into how here because we don't have time, but reaching out to people proactively, extremely effective way to make hires. And so you're looking for three things in people. And this is actually what they're looking for as well. Dan Pink defined this in the book Drive. People want fundamentally three things at work: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. They want a clearly defined role with clearly defined success measures where they can shape the role to get the outcome that you want first. That's autonomy. Mastery is they want to be able to grow. They want to stretch in the role that you're hiring them for. They don't want to just do the same thing they've always done. They want to know you care about them reaching their goals too. And purpose is about meaning. I see there's a bigger thing at play here that I'm contributing to, and that gives me meaning for the work beyond just did I do the task or not. Well, you should evaluate for those three things. Do people have examples of times when they handled autonomy well? Specifically, what have they done that proves that? How will this role fit into their career arc, and what skills do they hope to build in this role for you that show that they're going to be continuing to grow towards mastery by working for you? And then third, what's their personal relationship to the mission that you're on or the end work that you do? And I evaluate for those in addition to, and before I evaluate for, do you have the existing skills to do this job? Because skills can be learned, the other stuff cannot.
Yep.
And so the last thing I'll just say here is when you bring people in, it's your job to actually deliver on that. It's to actually give them autonomy and to actually encourage them to grow, to remind them of the vision that you're pursuing that gives the role meaning. Two books here for hiring process they're really well structured and give you kind of the nitty gritty. Both by Brad and Jeff Smart, GEOFF, are called Who and Top Grading.
Oh, yeah.
Very effective system for being able to evaluate, do people actually have experiences doing the things that you're asking them to do? And that could be either, do they really handle autonomy well and getting specific examples of that? Or it could be, have you been in an EA before and drilling down on the component skills of that? So I'll just leave those two resources there. Those are kind of the best I've found. And we could keep going, but I think that's a good basic overview.
I think so. Yeah, no, that's insane as far as the value you deliver in like 5 minutes. For anyone watching the video, I need more Post-its. I'm like taking all the notes. I'm going to have to get a transcript of this and read it for myself. And I haven't heard of Top Grading, but I think in the past month, 4 or 5 people have said, you should read Who. So, when that starts to happen and you got to start listening, like, okay, I guess I really do need to read it. That's awesome, man. So, well, great. I feel like, we're giving a masterclass in identifying and addressing burnout. And then again, I think one of the big antidotes to that's like building a really healthy team, having people in your corner, starting strategically with that, with the right, identifying the right roles by understanding the processes of your business, designing that role to where it's really attractive and effective, and then going out and advertising it and finding the right people to fill those roles. And I mean, speaking from experience, the first time's kind of hard and, daunting. And then, a lot of our people listening know marketing, you have marketing funnels. Well, we created a hiring funnel and we use that for the EA. And the beautiful thing about that is you can kind of clone it. And now for the next role and the next role, I have one selfish question before I let you say, hey, how do we get a hold of Barrett and listen to your podcast? You said you probably don't know the person you want to hire. I actually have one of the next roles I want to hire is more for I wouldn't even call it a sales closer, but more like an enrollment advisor, I guess you could say. Hey, are you a good fit for our program and which one? I was thinking all external. Hey, there's some guru who's great at sales. And then it was pointed out to me hey, man, you have 120 alumni of the same program. Some of them have some fractional time available. They're all love you and the program. why not go to them and say, does anyone here want to help sell this program because you've experienced it? So what do you think of that? Like having alumni of...
That's actually another great exception to the rule. I think if
cool.
you've managed teams and you've had people who have proven to you they can do the job, or people who have been through your programs, an awesome source of new employees, because they will be inherent advocates for what you do based on personal transformation that they've experienced. So that's another great place to find people.
Great. Barrett approved. All right. Well, look out, alumni. I'm coming for you. All right, man. Well, I really appreciate it. You've been super gracious with your time. I think we doubled the time that we had allocated. I've personally really gotten a ton of enjoyment and fulfillment from the conversation. So to close this out, Barrett, where should we go? How should we go deeper with Barrett Brooks and learn more from you and experience what you're doing over with your creative work and your podcast?
Yeah. Well, if you're the kind of person who believes that careers should be meaningful and they're a lever for impact in the world, you should go to goodworkshow.com. Got all the show notes and past episodes from the podcast. Love for you to subscribe wherever you get podcasts. It's available basically everywhere. And then secondly, if you're kind of at or about 7 figures in income, or revenue, I should say, and you're considering this point of, do I want to scale or stabilize where I am? That's a perfect time to engage me for coaching. And you can find that at barrettbrooks.com/coaching.
All right. Well, awesome. Well, this is, again, huge pleasure, huge blessing. Great to know you. I got to know you a lot better during this conversation. I'm glad we were able to record this one, let everyone else listen in. So obviously, Barrett's just a font of wisdom, has been down a lot of the roads that a lot of us are currently facing. And so definitely go check out the podcast. Highly recommend Barrett for coaching. So thanks again. Very grateful for you and your humbleness and getting to know me and opening up for our show here. So hope to do it again in the future, whatever your next version of your adventure is, Barrett. Thanks again for being here.